to the November 15th iteration of the Charlotte City Council Intergovernmental Relations Committee. I am one of your co-chairs, Braxton Winston. We have a pretty packed agenda. We'll have a pretty packed zoning meeting tonight, so we'll try to just kind of get this thing going. We'll go with introductions of council members, and then we'll go with staff. And Mr. Fenton, you can go ahead and take it over after that. Again, I'm co-chair, Braxton Winston, serving at large as well.
Tariq Bakari, co-chair.
Matt Newton, committee member.
Committee member.
Greg Phipps, committee member.
Dana Fenton, City Manager's Office.
Tracy Dodson, City Manager's Office.
Sarah Hazel, Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer.
Denata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Winston said it very well. We have a very packed agenda today. We have a lot to report on. And we'll have 4 different presentations. The first will be the second part of the bipartisan infrastructure plan funding. We talked about that last month, and we have some more to report today. Then we'll have a federal and state legislative update, followed by a recap of this discussion on the proposed legislative agendas from last week, and then followed by Sarah Hazel with sustainability, who will talk about a potential engagement opportunity with the North Carolina Utilities Commission. And you can bring up the first slide, please, staff. Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about advocacy for the bipartisan infrastructure plan funding. We talked about this again last month in quite a bit of detail. But today at 3 p.m., the president is going to sign legislation into law. And that'll be the first part. What the federal government will also have to do is pass an appropriations bill to actually appropriate this funding. So we probably would not see any funding opportunities come down to us probably sometime in January or February. Next slide, please. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Please go back. Again, the $1.2 trillion would be funded over a 5-year period. And then we're going to talk about the general framework of advocacy for this funding. Next slide, please. And next slide again. And you saw this chart last month. It provides the top line summary of the new funding, just the $550 billion worth. Next slide, please. I want to talk to you about some of the opportunities. We talked about some specific grant programs and other programs that would be available to seek funding from. But overall, there is about, we've looked at this over the past few months, there's about 71 sections in this bill that are relevant to the city. There's quite a few competitive grant opportunities. And actually, of those 30 grant opportunities, 23 of those are new, which is a really, really high number for a bill like this. And then we also have at the state also will be able to compete for some of these competitive grants as well, about 20 opportunities they have of the 30 that we have. So there's an opportunity there for the local governments, especially the city, to collaborate with state agencies on seeking this funding. Next slide, please. The first thing we're doing in terms of advocacy, strategic, getting ready for advocacy, is to develop the initial project list. And our purpose here is to position City Council to test and gauge this list of projects with the federal and state governments in the first quarter of 2022. And right now, what staff is doing is looking at a variety of things. They're looking at all the legislative text in the bill. They're taking a look at what the needs of departments are and competing for grants. I think Mr. Jones said last week at the meeting that there might be a need to bring in some extra help because some departments really don't have any experience in applying for grants, but they may be able to here. We're also going to need to facilitate interdepartmental consideration of these grants to hopefully they'll have a better chance of competing, and then identify also whether the federal agencies or the state will be the grant maker. In that case, if it's a federal agency, we know where we need to go. If it's a state, then we'll need to know who to talk to there as well. And then we'll be submitting that initial list to the city manager for his review. And the goal is to have that ready for use in early 2022. On the next page, I want to bring you an example of why we need interdepartmental consideration. There's one program I want to highlight, the Local and Regional Project Assistance. This is the new name for the old Tiger Build Raise program. And there are opportunities in there for ports, highways, ped trail, rail, transit, and those are things that we would normally send to aviation, CDOT, and CAS to take a look at. But there's a lot of different lenses there we need to apply to in all those cases, beginning with equity. The federal government is implementing a Justice 40 equity initiative to try to ensure that funding is made available for areas that have been left behind, areas of persistent poverty and so forth. And then there's other factors in there too that need to be taken into account. And that requires us to bring in staff from other departments to help in choosing those types of projects.
Mr. Fenton, what does regional and some of these kind of interdepartmental, obviously we don't have the answers to that right now, but what does that kind of entail? Obviously thinking about our transformational mobility network, but also thinking about some of the work that Councilmember Bakari, Co-Chair Bakari and Co-Chair Eggleston were working on in terms of trying to make relationships between Wilmington and our intermodal port here in Charlotte along the 74 corridor. Do you think we could think that kind of broadly when it comes to things like this with this local and regional project assistance?
Yeah, I believe so. Definitely here in the region, that they're, of course, with working with the towns in the county here within Mecklenburg and also outside the county, there may be some opportunities there. But there also could be opportunities, again, as you said, like with a Wilmington, with a Nashville, or a Raleigh, for example. And that's all in addition to the state agencies that we'd have to work with, too. Thank you. Next slide, please. This next phase, after identifying those projects, now it's time to test and gauge the support. And this is an opportunity for the elected officials and policymakers to get together with your counterparts on the state and federal levels. I think we would also probably have a review of these projects with between city staff and congressional staff, and then at some point towards the end, we're going to have to assess all the input we received and adjust the list as appropriate. And then that would start with phase 3, go on to phase 3, basically competing for grant opportunities. And I don't have any detail here to add except that this is a time when we're going to have to monitor for these grant opportunities. And these grant opportunities will be made aware to departments through their own contacts at the federal government and state government, but also our federal lobbyists will be watching, and I know that our congressional representatives and senators will be watching as well. And then after that, of course, it's grant preparation. If there is an opportunity there that we can work with. And as I said before, well, we may need to work with quite a few different folks, state agencies, other cities here in the state, and probably definitely in the region for some of these. So, so that brings up next steps. What I've done is schedule a standing item on your meeting agendas from December through June of 2022 for updates on the bipartisan plan and opportunities for funding. And next month, we're going to focus on the Charlotte Douglas International Airport. There are a couple of grant opportunities. Actually, there's one competitive grant opportunity and one airport formula funding program that they will be the recipients of. So we're going to have Haley Gentry in here to talk about some of those projects, but also to bring you up to date on the work that we've done in tandem with her department to prepare our congressional delegation to position them to support some funding requests we'll be making of the federal government, not through the bipartisan infrastructure plan process, but through the normal appropriations process. And of course, those are the airport projects I'm talking about. There are the 5 airfield projects that you all have been advocating for with our congressional delegation for the past 2 or 3 years. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for the presentation. I'd be glad to stand it to answer any questions if there are any.
Ms. Jackson, do we have any hands up?
Co-Chair, I say it's good for us to have this heads up. I think just given the timeliness of where we are, the punchline is if we're going after buckets of money that from the top-down perspective that are laid out for us to take advantage of, there's not a lot of action until we see that appropriation. However, if we go about creating and connecting 2 or 3 of our big visions and finding partners from the bottom up and being prepared for it, there will be a more likely chance that we'll be prepared to take advantage of what we know will be certain buckets that will have appropriations behind them. So I think, one, starting now and building on the work we've been doing, to your point, Co-Chair, the last several years, Charlotte to Wilmington, the 74 corridor, other opportunities like that is a no-brainer. And I think we also need to learn from our lessons of the past, be it with CARES money or with ARPA money and the really sad and items that we need not repeat that happened at the retreat. It's a good lesson that this needs to be a collaborative effort amongst all of us, not 1 or 2 people kind of keeping their finger on the pulse of it and then trying to take advantage of it, because we won't get anything transformational if we do that same old tired approach.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I guess one question I do have, whether it's for Mr. Fenton or our federal lobbyists who I think are on the line. I know there was the Build Back Better part of this. I know, well, from what I heard in the press, that there was last week the House was even considering a vote today by the 15th. Is there any update on that portion of spending package?
Yeah, the Build Back Better Act is a separate piece of legislation that is still being negotiated in the House itself, between the House progressives and House moderates, and then they're going to have to also negotiate with the Senate. And I understand that the Speaker was trying to have a vote on this by the end of the week. I'm unsure exactly what they would vote on, whether it be an actual bill to move forward or whether it would be a resolution to set the calendar for debate in consideration of it. But I think we can still say safely that we're still at least 6 weeks off from before that legislation is finalized.
Thank you. Mr. Phipps, you recognized?
Yeah, what role will CARPO play in helping to select these different projects?
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. That's a great question. I know you're the representative from the City Council to the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, or you were at one time.
Right.
There's something pretty exciting in this legislation that I didn't touch on, but I've already talked with Mr. Cook and Mr. Burke about this. In this legislation, there's about 15 or 16 competitive grant opportunities where regional transportation planning organizations can compete for grants. These are opportunities that they haven't had before. So I think there are definitely some grants in here that are more regionally focused than they are city focused. So I think that the CARPO could have a great role to play in that. Also, I understand from talking with Mr. Cook and Mr. Burke is that there have been some requests from some of the member cities and towns for help in preparing grant applications. And they have not been in that role before of helping to prepare grants. So, and that's actually, they're one of the departments we've identified as having a need for some additional resources as we move through the competition process.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. I don't want to cut you off, but you brought up a great point, and just a note for staff and fellow committee members. I think it could be a good idea if council members, if there was some way that we can get us a little smarter about our interaction with some of these RPOs, even really more specifically, the roles that our staff do play within these organizations, and how we might more efficiently and effectively interact with you guys in the work and giving good guidance in that perspective. I was an alternate when Mr. Phipps was the representative a couple of years ago, and I had a chance to go to sit in his place in one of the retreats. And I learned a lot, and I just didn't know the way we interact with those things. So given what we have on our plate, this might be a really good time to find ways to get us up to speed in that perspective.
I'll be glad to talk with Mr. Cook to see what we can do for you.
Mr. Phipps, go ahead if you still had other questions or comments.
Oh, that's it. That's it. So I appreciate the response and look forward to it.
I'm not seeing anything else, any other names from Ms. Jackson. So with that said, thank you for that update, Mr. Fenton. We can move on to item number 4, the federal and state legislative updates.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the federal and state legislative update today, we really don't have all too much to report to you. If the presentation could be brought up, please. Yeah, next slide. We'll just go through just a few things going on at the Congress and also with the General Assembly, and got some news to report on the General Assembly front in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. Signature initiatives. The two big things that two of the big things that the president wanted to get accomplished in his first couple of years in office. One is the bipartisan infrastructure plan that has passed. He's going to sign it here in about maybe another 45 minutes or so. And then, of course, they're going to start to work, or they're going to have to get to work quickly on the Build Back Better Act, or re-engage quickly on that. In fact, I think they would probably say they have been engaging on that for quite some time now. But again, I don't think you would see anything passed with the Build Back Better Act until the end of December. And also, I provided a list here of the areas that we've seen so far that it addresses that are key to us: housing, community violence prevention programs, the workforce development, sustainability programs and resiliency, digital inclusion, even more digital inclusion and sustainability and resiliency than what's in the bipartisan bill. And then there is the issue of the temporary protection and work permits for immigrants, especially for those with H-1B visas. And we would say that on the last issue with the immigration issue, that language is still going to have to pass the muster of the Senate parliamentarian to ensure that it can be included in a budget reconciliation bill. All right, and also the Congress has appropriations in the debt limit to deal with, both the continuing resolution to keep the government operating and the action to raise the debt limit. Both of those need to be taken by December 3rd. What you'll probably find is another continuing resolution, and which also increases the debt limit for what's needed. And again, I don't think you're going to be seeing an appropriations bill until the end of this year. It'll be real close to Christmas. It could even be somewhere between Christmas and New Year's when it's enacted. A couple of other issues we've been following: the police reform bill, George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Nothing to report on that since last month. And then the voting rights bill, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The Senate a few weeks ago, they were unable to advance the measure to debate and voting. Next slide, please. Let's transition to the state. And for those of you who are on before we started the meeting, Mr. McDowell, our state contract lobbyist, said that we could expect the 2021-23 state budget document to be voted on by the House and Senate this week, to be released sometime during this meeting. And the intent of the leadership, of course, is to pass this budget with a veto-proof majority this week. We understand that they've been working, the Republicans have worked very diligently in gathering additional Democratic votes to get this measure passed, and so they could withstand a governor's veto. And we're also awaiting the results of the appropriations and policy issues we've been watching. And of course, one thing that we'll report back on is what the budget does in terms of protecting firefighters and providing coverage for them if they do get cancer. Next slide, please. Another key issue that they took up and they have finished now is the congressional and General Assembly redistricting. And next month at our meeting, our state contract lobbyists are going to brief the committee on those efforts at your December 20th IRC meeting. So I can tell you right now, you're going to have a pretty full meeting next month, too. Next slide. We have some bills of interest we've been watching this year. The first four are mainly dealing with planning and development issues. And all of those, for various reasons, we've been watching, and none of them have advanced at all in the last few months. None of them right now are going to be, probably will not be enacted this year. And that last issue with the destruction of firearms, that legislation sponsored by Mr. Corbett passed the House in May, and it's been in the Senate rules ever since then. That doesn't mean the bill is dead, it just hasn't been scheduled for a hearing. And of course, all that legislation is eligible to be heard next year in 2022. And then in terms of our policy issues and our priority list, it's still status quo. We did have success on the municipal elections bill issue. And then on the state budget issues, those are the ones that we're watching that we're going to be watching for in today's release of the state budget. And we don't have any advance information as to how those issues are being addressed. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for the presentation. I'd be glad to stand for any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? None heard. Thank you for the update. We can go ahead and move on. Item number 5.
Yes, the next one is the recap of council discussion on the proposed 22 federal and state legislative agendas. We had the presentation last week, and then the week before we had the strategy session. And what I recall from last week, Mr. Chairman, is that we received a lot of questions about the bipartisan infrastructure plan because it had just gone to the president that day. And so, but we did receive a few questions about different issues from Councilmember Ashmere asked for clarification about the immigration reform position and how related to the H-1B visa issue. But I don't recall any other issues that were directed to the committee to consider this week. And what I do have in the presentation is really not a presentation. You've seen this before. I do have the different legislative positions that the committee recommended for city council consideration. And the vote of consideration by the council is scheduled for next Monday, November 22nd. And Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you to see whether there's anything that needs to be addressed further.
Committee members, do you have anything that you would like for us to consider or advocate on any positions on behalf of any of our colleagues to consider? Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you. Are we just on federal or either or right now? Mine's related to our state agenda.
You go ahead. You can go ahead with your state agenda item.
Okay, so in our committee meeting,
Mr. Eggleston, you're breaking up a bit.
Could you lean closer?
can you hear me now?
No, you're.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you better.
Turn off your video
Yeah, you can turn off your video if you like.
and lean closer to the mic, Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr. Picari. Can you hear me now, Mr. Winston?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
In the Safe Communities Committee meeting last week, there was an expressed interest from a majority of that committee for us to at least have the discussion around possibly revisiting red light cameras and or speed cameras, both of which would require some assistance and permission from the state. In the case of the red light cameras, it would probably necessitate a change in how the funds are distributed for those fees and whether or not Charlotte could implement that program if it chose to do so at a net neutral cost, which we could not currently. On the speed cameras, there is a provision that requires an officer to actually be present, which largely undermines the idea of using technology solutions to take some of that enforcement work off of our officers' plates if they still have to be there. So that would be the potential ask on that one. So I had said I would make sure that was brought forward and considered.
Are we considering that a motion?
Well, I guess I'd ask Mr. Fenton or Mr. McDowell or somebody what we think the prospects are. I think that both of those tools could be helpful in our efforts to increase safety on our streets. But I'm curious to know what they see the landscape being in Raleigh for either of those conversations. But I do think it's something that we'd at least like to explore, and maybe that exploration starts with getting our lobbyists to tell us where they think we stand.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Eggleston. On the issue of speed cameras and the red light cameras, that would probably have to be local legislation. And local legislation in the short session requires that all members of the delegation support it. It means all 17 members have to sign on to the legislation and agree that it's a non-controversial item. And I think that with the technology like the red light cameras, speed cameras, I'm not debating whether they're effective or not, but there are some privacy issues around them that might deter some members from signing on to it in a short session. You could wait for the long session where you don't need to have that level of support expressed. And it would also give you time to wait for a long session. For one, is to do a more thorough analysis of actually what would be needed. I have not been presented with any legislation. I've heard pieces of it like what you're telling me, but we would need to probably, there's other issues we need to consider as well, and then also to do the some advocacy with it with our delegation beforehand. So I would recommend that something like this be considered for 2023.
Mr. Phipps is the other member of both of these committees, and so I'll ask him if he thinks I left anything out. I know there was interest in this, so I don't know if there's a parking lot for issues that we believe we might be more successful with on our next legislative agenda. If so, I certainly think it belongs there, if not in this legislative agenda. But this might be something we would want to discuss with the full council, because there's obviously a push right now in the safety committee to address the traffic road safety, and this is a tool that several had expressed interest in. So, Mr. Phipps, did I miss anything on that front?
I don't think you missed anything. I think you covered it quite well. I would find it interesting that we're trying to replicate as much as we can what one of our sister municipalities in the state is doing in Raleigh and some other areas in that Cary area. So we're trying to mirror some language, in our proposal that would come close to what they're doing in terms of giving us some flexibility in using whatever funds we get to help defray the cost of implementing the program. So I would find it interesting that, that they would look at our proposal and scrutinize it in such a way as to disallow it at the same time when we have other localities in North Carolina that's doing it. So, but I guess all we can do is see, what's the best course forward. But I think you covered it well.
Well, I will say, and I'll let the co-chair chime in. Well, you wouldn't have my support for this. The way we have been trying to work our legislative agenda, we have had tried to put legacy items on, right? How can we talk to our delegation or our representatives or different branches of government to say, hey, this is important to City Council, this is important to the people of Charlotte. I will have an item, actually, once we're finished with this, I would probably ask to approach in a way like this. So I think it is in the spirit of the work that we've been trying to do on this committee. to create a legislative agenda to show what our aspirational priorities are, on top of ones that we think are going to be specifically actionable. Co-chair, how do you feel about that, or committee, how do you feel about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I think it's, it's understanding that the General Assembly is a group of humans who has certain desires as well. Us finding middle ground, us finding opportunities to negotiate for certain things that rise to our list. So I think it doesn't make sense probably to put that on the formal agenda because we want to get some wins, or we want some things that are what we're putting all of our effort and might behind, that are not low hanging fruit, and we're willing to go up there and work and trade and do the kinds of things that the Intergovernmental Relations Committee is designed to do. And I think all of us then individually can go work and find angles and say, hey, this person's interested in supporting it. And that's what jumps something from a parking lot into a primary list. So I think that's the purpose of the parking lot. But until something gets legs or something that we're all behind, it kind of probably sits there.
So Mr. Phipps, Mr. Eggleston, do you want to propose something, or you want to kind of think about it for a few minutes? I do have another topic in a similar sense of it, that you might want to think about the type of language that you want the rest of council to consider around this. Do you have that right here, right now, or?
I mean, I would tend to defer to Mr. Fenton's educated opinion on the best path forward for that issue.
I would agree with that, but I wanted to get clarity. Mr. Co-Chair Winston, did you indicate that you would be in support of something like this, or what?
No, I would not be in support of it. You wouldn't have my vote if it was a motion on the floor now. I mean, if it is a position of council, of course, I will advocate for the position of council. But you don't have. I'm not in support of the message that I'm hearing out of Safe Communities Committee.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there's one other issue I need to bring up. What I recall from this issue in years past is that there might need to be some negotiations with the school board as to the cost neutrality situation, because the administrative fees we were allowed to keep previously were not enough to pay the cost of the program. So that is something that's probably would have to be discussed, and there would have to be some agreement with the school board. It might be better.
I think that's where Mr. Eggleston and Mr. Phipps were talking about. We did learn about
Right.
a specific model that is being used in state that doesn't have the same revenue model as the one that was handcuffing us here in Mecklenburg County. Is that accurate, Mr. Eggleston and Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Well, any further action or further discussion on the item coming out of Safe Communities Committee?
Well, none other than I can see that that's what has been proposed already by Mr. Fenton, that we got two choices: the short session, which would be, a hurdle, and the long session would be maybe less of a hurdle. But I thought that we had gotten a general consensus through the referral process, at least, to examine the possibility for such action, and bring back something to the full council. And if that's something that we bring back is a desire to flesh this issue out before and decide on which session we want to submit it in, then that looks like the course that we're going to have to take for right now. If I'm not mistaking something, Chair Eggleston of the Safe Communities Committee.
Yeah, I think we want the path that gives us the greatest chance of success, and that's why we have lobbyists, is to help us determine what that path is.
Well, I'll also remind committee members that obviously this is not the last time to consider. So when we do go to the business meeting and we are considering our legislative agenda, if you do want to work with staff or lobbyists or anything, or anyone to work on any language, it's not most desirable to do that at the dais, as we all know, but it's something that you guys can still kind of work on between now and then if you so desire. So thank you. And again, in that sense, Mr. Fenton, something that we talked about, and you gave feedback on the staying in place, expanding those capabilities here in Mecklenburg County and in fact across the state. I understand in the same sense it will be very difficult for many different reasons to get any action on that now. But from discussions that I've had with Republicans that have interest in different parts of the state, as well as the business community, folks over at Rebic, some of other developers, as well as other interest groups like the Black Political Caucus and the county and of course us. I do think that this is a subject that we need to figure out how to broach about expanding those capabilities under the law. I think, again, as Mr. Bukhari stated, if we could say that if this is indeed a priority of the city council, to be able to officially kind of go out there and talk to people, not just in the legislature, but from what I've learned, the county commissioners from across the state, that professional organization, could be a better resource than even us going to, for instance, the League of Municipalities in this case. But I don't know how we do that if we don't have that issue on something like our legislative agenda. So I would like for us to figure out some type of strategy around that as we move forward.
I think, Mr. Winston, this would be a perfect thing to bring up at the next strategy session, which I can't remember what the date is, the first one in December, for discussion with the city council. I think that's, in fact, both of these issues. In fact, let me just go back to the red light speed cameras real quick. Do I understand that that was a committee referral that you're going to be reporting back out on the first Monday in December, Mr. Eggleston?
No, I mean, I'll be reporting on the discussion we had. It was not.
Mr. Eggleston, can you just please turn off your camera? You're just.
Yeah, so it was not a referral per se. It was something that there was interest expressed in bringing forward to this committee to discuss as for possible inclusion on the legislative agenda.
Oh, okay.
So you now know what came out of that discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Is looking for direction from this committee.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I believe actually both of these issues, the aging in place issues and the red light speed cameras, would be excellent things to bring up at the next strategy session. And as far as I can tell right now, we're not going to really have anything else as far as a report out that you would need to really get into a lot of detail at that meeting. But we certainly can provide you some speaking points for it if you want to have a council discussion on it.
Yeah, I would think, obviously, the red light cameras are something that is in the current events right now, and community discussion, as well as aging in place and, slowing down involuntary displacements of people all over town. So if the committee deems that this is not appropriate for consideration on our next legislative agenda, I would request that our time in that strategy session has some type of structured conversation around those two topics, unless the committee feels otherwise.
I think that would be good.
I'd just like to say that I thought that there was a referral to the Community Safety Committee about possible uses of technological options to help with our traffic and Vision Zero and things. And I thought
there was. I thought Mr. Fenton's question was whether or not it was being referred formally to Intergovernmental, which it is not.
Oh, okay.
And so we don't make cross, the mayor and the mayor say we don't make cross committee references. But I think our section of this would not necessarily be on the technology of it, but the intergovernmental need to broach this topic. So it would be our kind of our bucket of the bigger issue that we would be discussing on the first Monday in December. Does that make sense, Mr. Phipps?
Right, yeah. That makes sense. But I had a question on our federal legislative agenda.
Go ahead.
I know we went past it. In follow up to a question I asked over email about a week or so ago, I noticed that Republican House members in North Carolina, I guess all of them pretty much voted against this bipartisan infrastructure package. So I'm wondering how receptive would they be to our requests for infrastructure-related items as they may appear on our legislative agenda. I mean, anybody got any thoughts on that?
Mr. Phipps, I have some thoughts for you. What I've noticed, I've been in this, I just passed my 23rd anniversary of being in this, in the intergovernmental relations arena. And I've seen a lot of times where members have voted against a measure that provides substantial new funding. But their offices will be very helpful in helping local governments and others in their districts apply for the funding and compete for it. That's what I've seen.
Well, if there are no more comments or questions about the federal or state legislative agenda, we can move on to agenda item number 6, engagement with the North Carolina Utility Commission. And I believe Ms. Hazel will be taking charge of this section.
Yep. Thank you. So good afternoon, committee. Again, I'm Sarah Hazel, Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer for the City of Charlotte. So in January, I came to this committee to discuss participating with Utilities Commission on Duke Energy's Integrated Resource Plan. If you recall, that's the public plan that shares how Duke intends to generate energy for years to come. And then last week, I think Dana had a conversation with you about HB 951, which was the bipartisan energy legislation that was passed in the state legislature. So what I wanted to do just briefly was talk with you about a continuation and sort of an offshoot of those updates to tie it together. But just first to level set for anyone who's watching, the North Carolina Utilities Commission is an agency of the state of North Carolina, and they regulate the rates and services of all investor-owned public utilities. So here we're talking about electricity. And because the Utilities Commission has a say in how electricity is generated and how Duke generates that electricity, those decisions have a really lasting impact on our customers. Charlotte being a big customer, people who live in Charlotte being customers, and really it's very much related to our strategy called out in the Strategic Energy Action Plan and how we move to become a low-carbon city. And so as a reminder, just to refresh your memory, our top-line comments to the Utilities Commission back in January, they focused on alignment with your CF, specifically carbon reduction in the grid mix, increasing the use of renewable energy, increasing vehicle electrification efforts, and maximizing energy efficiency, and also focusing on low-income households and people who are energy burdened. So fast forward to your conversation last week with Dana around this bipartisan energy legislation, and it really does deliver on several of those comments that we made in alignment with your Strategic Energy Action Plan and some of those clean energy outcomes that we emphasized, and namely carbon reduction in the grid mix. But one thing that wasn't addressed in the bill was addressing energy burden. So again, paying an excessive percentage of household income on energy bills. It's really an equity issue. And so that now that the bill has become law, this is where the Utilities Commission comes into play, and they move on how they really implement pieces of that law. And so one of the things that they're addressing first through a docket is performance-based regulation. That's a key element of the new law. And so this could be a really transformative aspect of this law. It shifts the utility business model away from simply traditional cost for service model. So utility revenues are somewhat separated from their sales. So you can instead partially link utility earnings to achievement of performance targets. And then those performance targets are set based on the values of stakeholders. And so that's where this opportunity comes in, a value being sustainability. And we resubmitted the comments that we all discussed in January back to the Utilities Commission because they can only look at comments that were submitted at each proceeding, so they can't take old comments and look at them in this proceeding. And I think that's where I wanted to come back around and update you, because here's this opportunity through performance incentive mechanisms to resubmit our commitment, not only to carbon reduction, but increasing the access to renewable energy and specifically focusing on our low-income energy burden customers. And so that's a bit of a mouthful, but I just wanted to make this connection because we are engaging with the Utilities Commission under the Strategic Energy Action Plan strategy. I think there's probably opportunity for council and potentially this committee, if you want to talk further about a strategy to continue to really elevate our sustainability and resilience goals with the North Carolina Utilities Commission. But I did want to kind of make this connection and share with you this opportunity that we just submitted to the Utilities Commission. And so with that, I can take any questions and also be happy to take a step back and take a look at kind of what are some of the things coming up that we can discuss.
Well, one of the things, as you were talking and giving your presentation, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if this is not the correct committee to start this conversation in. That perhaps we should have this in the context of the Transportation and Planning and Environment Committee to kind of do some deep dives in the context of the CAP here and engage with that citizens group or the community group or whatever is left of it to get the type of feedback that the Intergovernmental Relations Committee could then formulate into an effective framework, for doing the intergovernmental portion of that work. Thoughts, comments from the committee? Staff, how does that sound? And of course, like I said, we don't necessarily have here the authority to make that recommendation. So maybe this is something that we talk to the mayor about and/or manager of the proper way to proceed. I just don't think that this is the right context.
Sure. And one thing I can note, add to that is that I think you're probably referring to Charlotte-Mecklenburg climate leaders. So we do continue to engage with the climate leaders from a staff perspective. I know that they're engaged with City Council. And one of the things that they called out as very effective in our engagement in January was the top line comments around energy burden and equity. And so this is very much in alignment with some of the things that they're interested in. But to your point, I think thinking through what's the right sort of forum to create a framework and then make sure that council has the opportunity to weigh in on it. I think that's a great.
And I don't know how engaged certain citizens are with certain council members, and therefore the ability for us to have a germane kind of conversation and come up with a cogent decision. So maybe I know the time is December 7th, I think I saw on there was the time you need to submit the comments.
So we resubmitted previous comments from our January meeting, but over the coming months, there are going to be additional opportunities on a variety of different items. And so we're not too late to create a strategic framework on how we engage with the Utilities Commission over a variety of different elements. And I would suggest, based on what you're saying, that might be a good way to do it.
I would agree with your assessment, Mr. Winston, that probably there's another committee, probably Transportation Planning Environment, as you said. I believe that the former Environment Committee was the committee that considered the CAP and the goals. And now that committee charge is part of the TPE committee, so that would probably be the right one, but that would have to be a discussion between you and the mayor, probably.
Happy to have that. Is this committee, do you agree? I know we got staff members that agree with that. Is this something that you would like for us to go to the mayor with and suggest that maybe we have bring this work to a different portion of our body? Thumbs up from Mr. Eggleston.
Yeah, it sounds okay to me. I mean, I see nothing wrong with it.
All right. Is this something that we can do during our strategy session on the first, to make that comment? Or is this something that you would want us to do quicker than that?
Because this December timeline is only if we want to make comments on other people's comments, I don't think there's not that urgency on that timeline, but obviously the urgency is, and it's an important issue, so I think we can take our time to do it right.
Would you mind maybe forming a note about all of that, and
Sure.
Something I'd be willing to sign on to and pass on to the mayor to figure out how we go the best way to deal with that.
Sure.
Any other comments or questions on this agenda item? Mr. Fenton?
No further words here about this item. But I do want to thank the committee today for the good discussion, and also I wasn't really sure whether we'd be able to get through all four things in 1 hour, and it looks like we have.
Teamwork makes the dream work out here, right? Any last words?
I think it has something to do if you got two chairs, I mean, that's what I think it does,
Well, I do appreciate, I think we all do kind of talk in between the meetings about things. And again, Mr. Fenton, I really do think the updates that you are giving to us on Fridays are extremely, extremely helpful to keep not just this committee on point, but all of us as colleagues on point. We dealt with some comments that other council members made that aren't here right now and are not part of this committee. So thank you for that, and just keep that up, and we'll keep on trucking along, all right?
Thank you.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Aye. Bakari, Mr. Newton, Mr. Eggleston, Mr. Phipps, all say yes, thank you.
Bye, everyone.